Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News Podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from, on what I'm delighted to say is a gloriously warm and sunny UK summer day. Hello to all our international viewers and people who tune into this podcast regularly, and some of you may just fall off your seats while you're listening to this to know that it is gloriously sunny and blue skies in the UK, contrary to what you might think the weather is usually like over here. Welcome along to today's episode, and it's a topic that we're going to continue with. It has been the subject of many of our podcasts over the last few months, and for good reason. It's one that we want to continue pushing and inviting guests on with an area of expertise in this particular sector. The subject is sustainability. And we're going to be talking today to somebody who is responsible for the UK's leading sustainability and net zero event for businesses, investors and innovators. It takes place in just a couple of weeks from when we're recording this podcast today, on the 27th and the 28th of June at Excel in London. I'm delighted to say that from Reset Connect, joining the podcast today is Duncan Reid. Duncan, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, James. Hello. Thanks for having me on today. And thanks for inviting me into your lounge on, you're right, a very, very hot, sunny day in London. It's absolutely racing outside, and we're kind of sat in a sweltering office trying to put the final stages to an event.
Absolutely. And in some respects, the fact that it's a sweltering day today is apropos, what we're talking about and the subject matter of your event. As I said in the introduction there, we are very much at the coalface of things as far as you are concerned as an organizer at the moment. We're 2 weeks out from the event, less time than that, as people will know, from going on site and starting the event build and all of that necessary stuff. Let's have a little rewind first of all, and give us some context and some history to the event before we talk about what's happening this year, where the numbers are, etc., etc. As I said, Reset Connect is the leading sustainability and net zero event for businesses, for investors, for innovators, for anybody who wants maybe to move their business towards that sort of focus. Tell us about how it started.
I've been working, before I set up Reset, I was obviously at Clarion for about 10 years, and I was looking after the energy portfolio at that event. At that company. And one of the things you could see on all the energy events that were taking place was, just the kind of transition piece. I mean, you said there about the coalface. I don't know if anymore we are at the coalface. Maybe we're at the wind, the edge of the wind turbines, or whatever wherever you are with renewables. And that, you could just see that transition was happening in the energy space. Obviously, the pandemic came, and I sort of was having a look at what other events. Phil Thor always used to say that the best time to launch a company or an events business was coming out of a recession. Yeah. And I think if you look at the big organisers, all of them were I mean, they've only now really just stopping doing this kind of compared with 2019, look back. And I just thought it'd be a really good opportunity to go and, to launch an event. And having, worked in the energy transition space, it was clear that the event that, I thought could be a big success and also, make a sort of meaningful impact was actually something in the sustainability or, net zero space. And I think there were sort of, in the middle of the pandemic, there were obviously got a lot of really good event people out there who didn't have jobs for, no fault of their own. So we were able to kind of put together quite a good team of co-founders. And we, researched the market, sort of did those classic launches. And we're kind of here now. We've got our sort of the first event we did with about 6 weeks notice. It was a week of webinars. Mm-hmm. And so that was fairly, easier to kind of do. And then last year, the first in-person event had nearly 3,000 people, and this year we're looking all right. We're here, as you said, 2 weeks out, pre-reg. We've got more people registered than came to the last event, and more people than have registered for the last event. Mm-hmm. And most organisers at the moment are seeing about half to 60% of their registrations in the last 2 weeks, and sometimes 25% in the last 48 hours. And if we get to those numbers, we're going to be in quite a good place, which is obviously what you want for a growing event in an important space.
Yeah, absolutely, it is, and something else that's probably important to highlight when we talk about the history and the sort of the genesis of the event, and talking about how, you know, launching events and launching businesses in or after recessions or after significant downturns is often the best time to do it. We were also presented specifically relating to what Reset Connect represents, with a scenario during lockdown where, because of this sudden shift in life, or, you know, overnight, we saw very quickly the positive effects of what happens when there is no air travel, when there are minimal cars on the road. You know, we had that scenario, didn't we, in the early months of the pandemic, where we suddenly had clear skies, cleaner air. You know, and whilst it was an extreme circumstance to happen, it did show what an impact we can make if collectively people are all sort of on the same page.
Yeah. And I think the challenge that, you know, we as a species have is that, you know, the planet's going to be here in a billion years, but, you know, how long do we want to stay here living on it? And, you know, I think you're right. We only really sort of respond to things when you're literally at the, you know, 11th hour up against it, when, you know, the vaccines that they kind of finalized to give us what we needed, you know, they'd had this technology for you know, decades. Well,
Yeah.
years and years and years, if not decades and decades.
Yeah.
And actually, what there wasn't really was, there wasn't a desire from, you know, enough people to want to progress it. And the other bit that was quite important was there wasn't the money. You know, the Oxford mRNA guys, I can't remember what the vaccine is called now,
Yeah.
but they'd had that for a while. And what they didn't have is money. They didn't have enough capital to kind of get that, you know, bring the vaccine to trials and successfully test it at scale, and then roll it out. And what happened with the pandemic is we got that, you know, concentration of minds. It was like, right, okay, let's just, every country threw money at it.
Absolutely.
And I kind of think we are there now with net zero, you know, and we're there with sustainability. I mean, it's 0.9 degrees above kind of pre-industrial levels at the moment. And they're saying that by 2027, it's going to be 1.5. So, you know, this number that we wanted to get to by, you know, 2050, we're about to pass it now in 2027.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it is warm, and it's like, I mean, 30 is a nice summer's day. But I don't know, but if you look at the kind of global map of where it's hot and where it's not hot, you know, it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter.
Yeah.
You know, if you own a house in the UK and you own it in, you know, if you can go and look at the Met's predictions to like whether you're going to be flooded or not by 2030 or 2050, and it's like there's a lot of kind of, you know, a lot of places are going to be underwater. But I do think that, you know, in the same way we responded to the pandemic, I think there's going to be some solutions out there that are going to help us fix a load of this stuff. And that's really what the event's about. It's about trying to pull together those, you know, the technology guys and like the big brands. You know, we've got speakers from kind of, you know, Nestle's, IKEA, Google, all these kind of super brands who've got, you know, huge complex supply chains, who are trying to work out how to decarbonize them all.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and that's basically every job, you know. And I think the events industry often worries that sustainability is like, you know, this thing that potentially is going to hurt us. But it's every sector. You know, if you're in food manufacturing, or if you're in fashion, or whatever it is, you need to try and work out the solutions. And it's really complex. You know, if you look at electric vehicles, they're about a third of the emissions come from an electric vehicle than it does from a petrol vehicle. But you've still got to get the nickel and cobalt out of the ground, and, you know, it's still very, very complex.
Yeah.
And the event's really bringing all these different C-suite leaders together to try and work out, you know, number one, what does the future look like? And number two, same with the pandemic, where do we get the money from to fix these things that we need to fix?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, I suppose one of the really obvious things I wanted to ask on today's podcast, when I knew that you were coming on, was about the transition from the first event being online and webinar based, understandably because of the time at which it was launched, and then making what must have been a very clear decision that, you know, the following year you were going to take it into a real life in-person scenario, and that there are a lot of challenges facing events across the board now, in-person events, in how they deliver on sustainability and how they address the issue of sustainability, whether it be transport, you know, the amount of equipment that's coming in to set things up, etc., etc. How much pressure have you felt, given the very nature of the event you're organizing, in terms of producing it from a technical standpoint in the best way possible. Has that sort of caused you the most headaches?
I probably, if this was an established event and when I was, trying to make it more sustainable, I think it would have been a lot harder. Because you're basically starting with a blank piece of paper, you can go and choose the suppliers who know where, where everything in their supply chain comes from. You can work with an AV company who understands what they need to do. I mean, and then we use Immersive for our AV, and we use White Space for kind of like our main contractor. And those guys, we're just able to start with, they already had sustainability at their core. If you speak to the team, speak to either team, that's kind of, they'd always been big things. I mean, White Space is a modular stand build company. That's their background. They've been doing kind of modular stand builds for for as long as I've been doing this, which is a long old time.
Yeah.
So actually, they're kind of best positioned. And obviously, with the pandemic and one of our sort of major tier one contractors disappearing, White Space have used this as an opportunity to come in. And I mean, the show last year was amazing. It was really, really good. And it just helps having, there's just little things like when we build everything, we get one contractor to build everything. So, all the space builds, all the stand builds, all the, pop-ups, all the features, everything's like one contractor, which really does limit the amount of lorries and trucks going to Excel. And I mean, Excel, again, we chose a venue that's, UK's first carbon neutral venue. And, if you're starting from scratch, you can find a venue and you can choose suppliers that are that. You can also just little things like the carpet, you can start at the beginning without there being carpet. We still get some people say, is the show finished? And it's like, yeah, it is finished. We're not doing carpet. The carpet's actually, it's creating a load of waste you don't really need. So I think from that point of view, we have it maybe easier than, some people who've got a, 5 or 10 or 20-year-old event that they're trying to transition. But again, you look at the work that the AEO have done, you look at the work that ESSA have done, you look at kind of Luke Iwanuka and what OpsNest are doing about kind of pushing sustainability. And, from when I started 2 years ago, if I went, you went to the AEO forum and you went to the ops bit and, there was a little bit about sustainability. The one that they did this year, I mean, it was all everyone was speaking about. And everyone across all the companies now have got a proper, a roadmap. And they're all at different stages. Informa are, at the most advanced stage, but everyone's, they're working on it and everyone's sharing. And I think the good thing that happened, the pandemic really did bring the industry together. And I can see that collaboration that the industry got through the pandemic has continued into this. No one sees sustainability really as a point of competitive advantage. It's like if you've got, if you work something out, you'll tell all the others.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to say that that's a very articulate way of phrasing it, is that that there is no competitive advantage. Yes, certain businesses will have competing events, and certainly in the trade show sector and the conference sector, no doubt that there are competing events industry to industry. But I think it's important that you flag up, that it's a bit of a cliche, but everyone's in this together. There is, or there does seem to be, a genuine collective drive within the events industry to want to improve this, and that's obvious just from the sheer amount of conversations that I've had. I host this podcast, but there's a team of people at Event Industry News who source and get suggestions for podcast guests and topics, and it's indicative of the industry as a whole that probably 50 or 60% of the emails that I've had in the last few months have been podcast guest suggestions that have all been related to sustainability in one way or another. And if that's just on one podcast, if we then amplify that up across the industry, it's obvious that there are a lot of conversations taking place. And I'm sure, given the nature of what you do as an organizer, that a lot of your year, other than planning the event, is probably spent looking at what conversations are taking place and being involved in those conversations.
Yeah, 100%. And there's some great, I mentioned AO and ESSA, but the Joint Industry Meetings Councils obviously push the net zero carbon events pledge, which has got hundreds of people signed up to it. If you look at some of the other big events out there, IMEX and Convex and all these other shows that work just in the event space, they're kind of pushing it. I mean, we're not just a sustainable event, but that is definitely a track in our entire program. And we've got one stage that's all around kind of cities talking about how they're rebuilding, another stage net zero business, which is all kind of the Microsofts and Sages and Axes talking about kind of what they're doing for the climate transition. And then we have a big finance and investment stage. But we've got a whole London hub just dedicated to events content, and it's got, we've got kind of event industry news there. We've got a whole load of speakers from across the event space. Lou and the Ops Nest have got an event for kind of like senior leaders in the events industry looking at sustainability. So I think there's a lot of conversations. And I think it's again, from how it was 2 years ago, it's now everyone is talking about it. And back to the finance bit, I think that, if you are, whatever business you are, if you're kind of, whether you care about it because you're passionate about the environment, or whether you care about it because you're purely, just a money driven person, you now have to, you've got to be doing sustainability. If you are a small owner operator and you're looking to sell, like we probably will be at some point, then you need to make sure that, the business you're building, it is, is a sellable asset in the future. And that's the same for whether it's even the big companies that are private equity owned. Those businesses need to have a good sustainability strategy, because if they're in a 5 or 8 year, fund, wherever it is, at some point that fund is going to come up for, refinancing, or they're going to look to go and join a new fund. And those guys need to have, the people who are going to buy them are going to want to know that they are, they're running the most sustainable events that they can.
Well, and that's probably, and that's not just true for events, but that's probably true for many of the visitors to your show, because as it says, it's for business leaders. So regardless of what business sector you are looking to start or grow a business in, if your ultimate aim is to grow a business to then sell on, make some money on it, then what you've just said is relevant to every sector, isn't it?
100%. If you're making frozen ready meals, and you've got all your refrigeration units, you've got all your lorries, all those trucks are probably all diesel trucks. How and if you think of how you even make food and cook it and then stick it in a fridge. I mean, if we think we've got challenges in the events industry, there's a load of sectors that are really, really very, very complex supply chains, and that's why the event's quite interesting, because it is around kind of cross industry and cross sector collaboration. So you'll hear someone from food or fashion or whatever it is talking about the challenges they've got, and it'll put the events industry piece into a bit of context. And it's also good, if you're selling, the people who are your sponsors for a lot of these events, they're all talking about the show about why sustainability is important. So if you're selling to it, every finance company in the world has got a net zero commitment. They've got a 2025 or 2030 commitment, often for their employees. If they've got 5,000 or 10,000 staff, they want to be net zero for their own internal operations. And then anything they own by 2050 at the latest. Most are like 2040, or if they haven't. So I think it gives you a really good insight into what the whole business community is looking to do. And then you're right, how you finance it, because you're not going to want to take the profit that your business makes and have to go back to that food example and buy new fridges and lorries and trucks and you don't have some of these investment, the capital expenditure on them is like millions or hundreds of millions. And that's just not something anyone can take out of their operating profit. So you want to, people come to the event to work out how they finance that. What does that debt look like? Is it a loan? Is it, more shares or whatever? And there's a lot of people kind of talking about their journey and what they've done, what the plan is and how they started measuring, and then they realized that they're going to need some money to get it. And then, there's a whole load of different kind of opportunities to talk to people about, investing for the future.
So again, something I wanted to ask, and it was driven by something I read a few months ago, probably at the start of this year, about cloud storage and how reliant we are as a world now, as consumers and businesses, on cloud storage, and how unaware the majority of us are of just how much energy that uses. I was curious to sort of throw that into the mix of the conversation today and see whether or not there's a sort of does that crop up at all at the event in terms of IT
completely.
usage?
Yeah, completely. I mean, the thing as well is that people often think that kind of digital has no carbon footprint, and they're like, well, physical events obviously have a carbon footprint because people have got to get there. But, digital events, and the podcast we're on today has got a digital footprint. So I think the second biggest like energy user as far as kind of cities go in the Netherlands. So after Amsterdam, the next biggest energy user is the Facebook server factory. So that is, that's bigger than all the other cities in the Netherlands. Their second biggest energy consumer is Facebook. So that's just like, and that's basically how everything operates.
Yeah.
So, but I think, the kind of where, I mean, it's daunting at times. It really is, and everything you seem to do has a sort of negative carbon footprint on it. But if you just think about fintech, and this sector that I work in now, some people call it climate tech, some call it sustainability or net zero or ESG. But, if you look at the fintech sector, the way fintech worked was that, 10, 15 years ago, people were going into banks with like, paying in books and checkbooks. And in 10 or 15 years, the technological revolution that's happened in the fintech space is just phenomenal. And now, my app speaks to your app, and I can send you money, and I might be HSBC or NatWest, and you could be anybody, and I can send money around the world to anyone I kind of want. And the technological advancement we've had in the fintech space is huge. And if you look at the capital deployed in there, the UK fintech market's like 11 billion, and the US is like 40 billion. So they're big numbers. But the climate space is trillions. There's trillions and trillions of dollars being pushed into this space. So the opportunity is, we're going to get this stuff fixed. And, so data center might be using a lot of energy, but they'll work out a way that, they stick it in the sea off the coast of Iceland, which they're doing, which means you then don't need to have the kind of the cooling fans cooling it down as much because it's underwater. So I think there's a load of, there's a load of solutions that we're going to work out over the next, 5 or 10 years, but there's going to be this kind of rapid change. I mean, again, you can see it in electric vehicles now. 3 years ago or 4 years ago, almost no one had electric vehicles, and anyone who is any of your friends who were petrol heads were saying, I'm never going to switch, I'm going to be petrol forever. And now there's just been this almost like a tipping point where everyone looks at the residual, what can they sell their car for in 3 years? And it's like, well, if you live in London and you've got a petrol car with the ULEZ thing, it's worthless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's almost like the Kevin Bacon thing, the stages of removal. It is that, 5 years ago, I didn't know anybody with an electric car. And you could walk into any sort of scenario now where there's a group of people, and I bet everybody in a room knows probably at least half a dozen people who've got an electric vehicle. And you're right, we've gone past that tipping point where it's, and of course that's one of the next big challenges, isn't it? We're selling more electric vehicles now than we have the infrastructure to actually be able to handle them and charge them. So that's potentially gonna cause another tipping point or conflict I think it's in a couple of years' time, where we reach this point where we could be at sort of critical mass if the infrastructure doesn't develop quickly. And again, that may be something of a topic of conversation at the event.
And it is, and I think the thing that's also quite interesting is you get, each of the parties, the kind of the UK election parties have kind of, got very different strategies about how to deal with this. You look at Biden in the US with his IRA Act, and I mean, they're just pushing renewables and electrification as fast as possible, massive tax incentives, and it sounds like the new Labour policy that's going to be rolled out at the end of this month, at the end of June, has got some kind of similar sort of big brave moves in it. So you don't, it's different. They're talking about different planning rules and regulations, so that you don't have to go through that kind of the long planning process to get windmills put up and solar panels put up. So I think they'll definitely be talking about it. All this at our event. It's very much around kind of those new emerging technologies, how you get the capital to do it, and that kind of the sort of 4 main visitor types are our governments and local authorities, their businesses, they're the finance community, and they're the kind of the sustainability professionals who help the first 3 groups kind of pull it all together. And I think the opportunity for the UK's got an opportunity to kind of lead on the kind of green stage. But if you look at what they're doing in kind of mainland Europe as well, I mean, phenomenal efforts to kind of fast track like the EU's competitiveness in this space. So I think oil and gas has got a very short life left, I think, and I think that the transition to kind of renewables is just speeding up, faster and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I'm going to sort of turn the topic of conversation to is I suppose your opinion and your thoughts as far as other event organisers are concerned. Because in a recent recording that I did, and I'm trying to think of the person's name off the top of my head, and because we've had that many conversations on the podcast recently about sustainability, I can't remember which episode. So people tuning in, you either know the one I'm talking about, or you're going to need to go back and listen to them all. But it was this idea that there was a certain fear that was sort of simmering underneath the surface of the events industry amongst event organizers, where they were feeling the pressure of having to deliver a more sustainable event or sustainable events, and feeling like they had to make dramatic changes overnight, or that all of a sudden next year we're going to have to be net zero and carbon neutral and massively reduce our carbon footprint. And the guest that was on the podcast said, look, what's really important, what's more important, is that we're stepping in the right direction. You know, it won't happen overnight. And even for yourselves who are delivering an event that's entirely focused on sustainability and net zero, it's going to be impossible, I would imagine, for you to do that initially with the events infrastructure as it is at the moment with the wider industry. So what's more important, this guest was saying, is that we take positive steps to start making those changes, so that over the short, medium and long term, we're setting achievable targets rather than putting ourselves under this unachievable pressure of changing for our next event.
Yeah, and I'd say, it's all about just transition. And they're kind of like the key words, just transition. You can't expect all global economies just to switch overnight into being 100% sustainable. I mean, what you can do, though, is you can take small steps. The first step that's really quite easy, you just need to start measuring what it is that you do. Because once you start measuring and, recording what it is that you're doing, and again, that doesn't have to be, you don't have to spend days and days and days doing it. There's a load of great tools out there. Some of them are free. There's a load of consultants out in the space who can kind of start giving you advice. We run workshops if people are interested in attending any of those. You can come to our show. There's, every day there's a free carbon measurement workshop on aimed at event organisers. So, that's kind of quite easy. But I think those, once you start making those kind of changes, like measuring it, you actually realise there's some things you can do which dramatically change your event. And then the final bit you can do also is, if you start measuring, you can start offsetting the carbon emissions, or, you can start looking at some of the big, bits of your supply chain that need work on them. Two easy things for your listeners and viewers. If you just, it's going to seem crazy, but if you go and look at your pension fund for your business actually is like, they had a look at the FTSE 100 companies, and they found out the pension funds of the FTSE 100 companies were 17 times as polluting as the businesses themselves, because all the pension funds were all invested in oil and gas and oil exploration. So, does everyone know where their pension is? So you switch your pension to one that doesn't invest in oil. No one knows where their pension is, do they? Because who's going to pay attention to that? Some other person looking after it. So there's that one. The other one that's really quite easy so you can, that's an email to your HR department. You can send that now if you wanted. Who's our pension fund investing in? And the other one that's quite easy for event organisers, just to do sort of straight away, is just look at where your energy is coming from. If you are an organizer, we actually have quite a lot of collective buying power. If you say to a venue, I'm only using you for my next event, conference, show, if you can 100% prove it's renewable energy, the venues will all start switching. There's 10,000 plus event venues in the UK, and go around every country around the world. That's a lot of venues. Suddenly, if all the event organisers start saying to all the venues, we're not doing it unless you're renewable, and all the venues start emailing their electricity supplier, suddenly you get a massive change. And it'll be like the electric cars. Suddenly, if you're one of the venues that doesn't have on your website, we're 100% renewable energy, then people are just going to go, I'm not going to do that one. And the thing about RFPs and so on is that, often when an event organizer is looking at a venue's website, if it doesn't have their sustainability policy as, a link on their website and say they're 100% renewable, the 24-year-old who's actually doing that RFP for their boss probably isn't even picking your venue up. So, the sooner some of these venues kind of switch and go on there, I think the better. And then, so number one, pension, number two, energy. And then the third thing is just come to Reset Connect. We'll teach you what to do. There you go. shameless plug.
No, it's not a shameless plug at all. You know that we've got you on the podcast today to talk about this, and you know, it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't take the opportunity to push the event. You know, we're recording this for context, everybody, on Monday the 12th of June. The event itself takes place on the 27th and the 28th of June, and I already know that we're going to turn around this recording really, really quickly, and it will either be out at the end of this week or very, very early next week, so that people have got the opportunity to listen to this episode, Duncan, and if they haven't already done so, to register for the event and get along there. You know, you've still got 2 weeks from this recording date, and I dare say at least a week from the point of listening to this to be able to get along. It's over 2 days. XL London now, the transport links are great, aren't they, Duncan? You know, we've got the Elizabeth honestly, line there is a transformation.
The Elizabeth line is just absolutely amazing. I mean, I remember when the venue opened in 2001, and I did a video game event there in 2001. And back then, it's like, we've got this Crossrail coming, and it never came. And then it's now there, and it's a game changer. And I think it makes, you know, getting to XL is now so easy. We're at the West Entrance, which is where the Elizabeth line kind of drops, you know, into the venue. And we've got, you know, 300 plus 350 speakers, 5,000 attendees we're expecting, and you know, a good 200 plus exhibitors. Yeah. So there's, you know, there's a lot there. Obviously, you know, if it is event organisers listening to it anyways, you know, there's probably time to go to XL anyway, isn't it? And, you know, I'm sure that there's some business if you work with them that you want to do. You know, there's a host of other events up there that are probably worth having a look at as well. So you can, you know, kill two birds with one stone.
Well, that's the beauty about the venue as well, isn't it? If we're talking about, you know, carbon footprint and sustainability and people who are attending events, is that, you know, on any given day, if you go to it, or any given week, if you go into XL for one particular trade show, there is quite a good probability that there's another event taking place there that you could probably attend that you didn't even know about when you walk in there and you go, oh, we'll nip into there and have a couple of hours.
Yeah. And well, the one that's on also for this sector is the meeting show. You know, the meeting show is on at the same time as us. So, you know, if you are thinking about going to XL, then, and again, you know, they've got sustainability content, we've got sustainability content, but I think we've also got, you know, 300 business leaders from across, you know, any vertical or sector that we as an industry are selling event content and concepts to. You know, all of our sponsors and the big brands who exhibit at our events and attend our events as delegates are there. And, you know, if you're trying to get someone from any finance company, their chief sustainability to come to your event, their chief sustainability officer will be, you know, looking at what it is that they're you know, how sustainable your event is. And we can, you know, collectively, we can kind of share some of that information.
And you know, again, it would be foolish of me not to shamelessly plug Event Sustainability Live, given that it falls under the Event Industry News banner. Most people will have probably seen already that it was announced earlier this year that a new event called Event Sustainability Live, specifically for the events industry, specifically for event organizers and people who work in the event sector, discussing all things sustainability, but just within our own sector, which is you know, a different sort of tangent, if you will, to the sort of the more sort of wider encompassing approach to sustainability that Reset Connect takes for many different business sectors, Duncan. But Event Sustainability Live will run alongside Event Tech Live at XL London on the 15th and the 16th of November, so much later on this year. And again, it goes back to this idea that collectively, if more conversations are taking place, if there are more opportunities for people to go and learn and educate themselves and improve their own understanding of this particular subject matter, it's only going to have a positive effect in the short, medium, and long term. So a little plug for that. Let's make sure, Duncan, before we wrap up today. Oh, go on.
I was just going to say, we've actually got, from, you know, the kind of, if those two shows that you've got with the kind of event tech piece and the event sustainability piece, we've actually got sessions from the Event Industry News team at Reset Connect in a few weeks. So, you know, if you're interested in the event tech piece and how you can use tech to drive more sustainable events, or the event sustainability piece about some of the kind of the different providers that are on the market, to, you know, from signage to venues to whatever it is, then, you know, you can get a bit of a taster with us. And then, go along to see James and the rest of the team kind of later this year up at XL, where hopefully I'll be speaking again. I spoke last year at the Event Tech show, so I loved that. Great show.
Yeah, papers are now open for Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live. So the call for papers are open for both of those. So again, anybody listening to this podcast today who might want to get involved in either of those shows and in the conference program, please do get in touch via the websites for those events, because the call for papers is now open. Before we go, Duncan,
I was going to say I need to get my submission in then, but I'm busy for the next 2 weeks. So hopefully,
you could be excused for the next 2 weeks. You won't miss the deadline, and if you do, you've got dispensation given what you're going to be up to in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So don't panic about that. We'll make sure that your submission comes in.
Yeah. Great stuff, James.
Reset-connect.com is the venue website. I think I'm right in saying, Duncan. And that's presumably, right, yeah. If you go to any of the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, there are pages for Reset Connect on all of those social media platforms. And I'm sure Duncan and his team would be delighted if anybody listening to this podcast today goes to any one of those platforms, gets a link for registration, and if you've got the ability and a bit of space in your diary to get along to that event, 27th and the 28th of June, Excel London. Not long before that takes place, but still time to get along. Duncan Reid from Reset Connect, thanks very much for joining the podcast today.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me on here. Don't forget to Reset Connect in a couple of weeks, and it's free. It's the only bit James didn't say. It's
absolutely
free, no
free to attend. So click that button. It's really obvious on the website. It says register free. It couldn't be more obvious. Select the right button, everybody. A couple of bits of housekeeping before we wrap up today's podcast. If you are watching this on the Event Industry News website, thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget to have a little click around and check out the latest news, features, special supplements, all available in other areas of the website, and of course the A to Z supplier directory. If you're looking for a service or a supplier for your event, the chances are you'll find it within the comprehensive A to Z supplier directory available within the website. If you are listening to today's podcast on your podcast audio platform, thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to go in the direction of the website when you get a moment. Check out eventindustrynews.com for everything I've just said, which brings us neatly and nicely to the end of today's episode. My thanks once again to Duncan Reid from Reset Connect. Good luck with the event, Duncan. Hope to maybe get a bit of roundup from you later on this year about how it went, and no doubt we'll continue to see you on these sort of conversations. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode.